Good evening, everybody. If you will, please open up your Bibles to 2 Samuel chapter 12. 2 Samuel chapter 12. We are looking at the life of David, and unfortunately, we are looking at the life of David in the part of his life that's a little bit more discouraging. But there are great lessons to be learned here that we need, because we find ourselves in the same situation. And so David has sinned with Bathsheba, and the Lord has forgiven him of that sin, but there are consequences that follow. What were those consequences? Yes, the sword would never depart from his household. Okay, that's one. His child would die. That's two. Yeah, public shame. And then we could also say that the Lord's name was blasphemed, if we want to put that in there. Which one of those have we already seen come to pass? The child would die, and maybe we could say the public shame, not public shame, but the Lord's name being blasphemed, maybe. But the child would die. And so then the last thing that we looked at was the child dies, but Bathsheba has other children by David, and one of those is beloved of the Lord. In other words, the Lord has chosen him to be used in the plan that we're looking at in the Scripture, which is the coming of the Messiah. And what's his name? Very good. So that brings us to verse 26. Now you remember the context of this whole story that's taking place is the king of Ammon dies, and David sends ambassadors to go comfort his son, who is now reigning, and he's convinced that David is just trying to spy on the land. He ends up shaming the ambassadors, and this sparks a war. And so then the Ammonites hire the Syrians to come and to fight against Israel, and Joab defeats the Syrians, and so the Syrians say, well, we're not helping anymore. So then Joab goes and besieges Ramah, which is their capital city, Ammon's capital city. David was back in Jerusalem while his army was besieging Rabbah, and that's the reason, that's the setting of when he ends up seeing Bathsheba and commits adultery with her.
This almost becomes a, oh yeah, I forgot about all that going on moment.
Yeah, exactly.
Because we got so focused in on David and his situation. But yeah, this is what's happening, the broad spectrum. If you pan out, this is almost the bigger picture, but we've been dissecting David and Bathsheba, but this is what's been going on.
That's right.
Meantime. And of course, lends the idea that David probably should have been there, which would have prevented him from a whole lot of heartache.
Yep. So we come back to this setting, and we kind of wrap up. We kind of wrap up this section, I guess, of David's sin with the conclusion of the war against the Ammonites. And so if you look in verse 26, it says, Joab fought against Rabbah and the people of Ammon and took the royal city. In other words, what he did when it took the royal city is their last access to being able to survive this besiegement was cut off, because verse 27 says, Joab sent messengers to David, said, I have fought against Rabbah. I have taken the city's water supply. How long can they last without a water supply? Not long. I mean, sieges come to end pretty quickly when the water supply is cut off. But then he says to David, now therefore gather the rest of the people together and encamp against the city and take it, lest I take the city and it be called after my name. So David gathered all the people together and went to Rabbah and fought against it and took it. So if we forget where Rabbah's at, right here. And so David comes from Jerusalem, he comes to Rabbah, and they gather all the people together, they take the city, and verse 30 says he took the king's crown off his head, and its weight was a talent of gold, which is a pretty heavy crown, and with precious stones, and he set it on David's head, and he brought out the spoil of the city in great abundance, and he brought out the people who were in it, and put them to work with saws and iron picks and iron axes, and made them cross over to the brickworks, and he did this with all the cities of the people of Ammon. And so David then returns to Jerusalem. So we're just given this brief summary here. The war's wrapped up, another victory for David. More area is now under David's control. That's the significance of him taking the king's crown and putting it on his head. Now, if you were that king, what was his name back in chapter 10? I forgot. Hanan or Hanan. He messed up, didn't he? He really messed up. Because all David was trying to do was say, hey, I'm sorry about the death of your father. And I had a good relationship with your father. I'd like to have a good relationship with you. And Hanan picks a fight with David, and this has ended up terrible for the people of Ammon and for his kingdom and for him. And that crown being taken off of his head and set on David's head was just kind of the symbolic defeat of how all of that went so wrong in that.
Well, I would believe that all the people of Ammon was probably glad that it was David that was coming in as king, even though they were put in slavery. Because a lot of the other tribes, when they were in war with another country, they killed them all.
Yeah.
Except the choice few that they wanted, but the majority of them were dead.
Right.
Well, this is, going back to what you were saying there. Again, he received bad counsel. And that's not going to be the last time we see a king get bad counsel and make bad decisions. That's going to be very costly to him and his people.
Everybody, yeah. Let me mention one other thing here as we get into chapter 13. What we're doing now is we're continuing to look at, the Bible is going to continue to show us these consequences for David's sin. And so chapter 13, we pick up with that, and we're going to see it for a number of chapters yet. But we're seeing the fulfillment of those consequences that God said would come to pass.
All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Chapter 13, verse 1. It says, Now Absalom, David's son, had a beautiful sister whose name was Tamar. And after a time, Amnon, David's son, loved her. Okay, if we go back to 2 Samuel 3, we have a list of David's sons that were born to him while he was at Hebron. And there's 6 listed there. Who knows who the oldest is? No? Well, let's just go back. Let's go back to 2 Samuel 3, verse 2, and I'll go ahead and read it. It says, And the sons were born to David at Hebron. His firstborn was Amnon of Hinnom of Jezreel, and his second Gilead of Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel, and the third Absalom, the son of Maacah, the daughter of Talmai, king of Geshur. That's going to be significant later in this story, this king of Geshur, because we're going to see that unfold. But there you have the firstborn and you have the third. Now, I don't know where Tamar fits in this, but she seems to be a full sibling with Absalom, whereas Absalom and Tamar is going to be a half siblings with Amnon. So that's just to kind of get that out of the way and make sure we understand what's taking place here. All right, go ahead.
So can I say something about Ammon? So David has been a very, very successful king. I know right now we're looking at his failure in some areas, but he's been an extremely successful king. Who should precede him on the throne? Ammon. So the whole nation would be looking and expecting Ammon's going to be our next king. How does he measure up? Is he going to be better than David? How is this going to go? And remember, this lineage, the scepter shall not depart from Judah till Shiloh comes. And so we're looking with each heir, is this the Messiah? Is this the problem? Boy, if David was this good, can you imagine what the next generation who could be even better, maybe? And so we're looking for that. We're anticipating. We're trying to see, is this one going to be the Messiah or not? So keep that in mind.
So the other bad part of that is what the human thinks, because his firstborn, he's automatically going to be king, but it's who God chooses to be king. But just like they wanted a king, and they didn't want God as the ruler, every time humans actually gets to thinking the way that it should go, it's not necessarily the plan of God, because his way is going to always be the one that comes through.
That's right.
Does David know that Solomon's going to be king yet?
I don't know, because
Solomon's even been born.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what we've been introduced to Solomon, but I'm not sure.
David might be
Exactly. Yeah.
and Absalom, and I think that's why you see him mourning so much.
Right. I think you're right.
All right, verse 2. Naaman was so tormented that he made himself ill because of his sister Tamar, for she was a virgin, and it seemed impossible to Ammon to do anything to her. But Ammon had a friend. So he's got an infatuation with his half-sister here, is what Ammon has. But he can't figure out a way to make this happen. But it says in verse 3, he's got a friend who's not only a friend, but actually a first cousin, whose name was Jonadab, the son of Shemaiah, David's brother. And Jonadab was a very crafty man. You know, that statement right there kind of tells us a lot about this individual. And listening to the recording, I remember that Larson made a connection between the way the serpent in Genesis was described. Do you remember how he was described? Yeah, crafty, cunning. That's kind of how this character is described as well.
Now, it says that Jonadab is, what's his relationship to Ammon? You mentioned his first cousin, but how does it describe it here? Friend. All right. Friend. And he's concerned about him in verse 4. But I want you to think about, so what would a good friend advise? Now, what's Ammon's problem? I'm in love with someone that is off limits. I can't have. What would a good friend say to someone who is in love with someone who's off limits?
Nip it in the bud.
That's right.
With being happy like that, do they not sometimes get permission? I mean, as he was saying after the fact that he could have, she said,
Yeah. So that's a great question because according to the law, I don't think so. Not at this point. Now, prior to this, before the law of Moses, I think this relationship in the law of Moses would be prohibited. If not, and I could be wrong about that, so somebody may want to check me on that. If not, whatever the situation is, at least Ammon feels like she should be off limits. The way the New King James words it is it was not proper, and so whether it's by God's law or whether it's by social custom at this point, he's.
But doesn't she say after the fact, it would have been better if you just go ahead and let me stay since you've already done it?
Yes, yeah, and we'll probably talk about that a little bit because that does that's fine. But that does have to do with the law.
Okay, so we're introduced to this friend of Ammon, Jonadab, who's a very crafty character. And so he's going to devise a plan for him. Verse 4 says, "And he said to him, O son of the king, why are you so haggard morning after morning? Will you not tell me?" Ammon said to him, "I love Tamar, my brother Absalom's sister." Jonadab said to him, "Lie down on your bed and pretend to be ill. And when your father comes to see you, say to him, let my sister Tamar come and give me bread to eat and prepare the food in my sight that I may see it and eat from her hand." So Ammon lay down and pretended to be ill. And when the king came to see him, Ammon said to the king, "Please let my sister Tamar come and make a couple of cakes in my sight that I may eat from her hand." And so he comes up with this play here to where he can coax Tamar to come in to his quarters, his lying quarters. And of course the whole thing is a guise just to bring her in to where he can have her alone. And you know, some people have speculated whether Jonadab understood the full fruition of this. I kind of think he probably did, especially the way the Bible describes him as a crafty, individual. So I think he's laying the groundwork out. He knows exactly what's going to take place when this unfolds.
Yeah, I would. It seems to be the case because the problem that they're trying to solve here is I want her, but I can't have her. And so they're trying to work around that and say, well, how could you have her, without, even though you're not supposed to? And so it seems that that's the way
Let's
that it's working.
incorporate the king in this.
Yeah.
And who can deny his order?
And David, you have to think about this. Did he ever wonder why? Why do you want Tamar to come and see you? This. But I don't think that he probably suspects anything at this point, or he wouldn't have complied with this. And we're going to see would be some safeguards in place. In other words, initially they were not alone together. And so David may have never even thought about the fact that they could ever be alone. I don't know if he had any suspicions about this or not. It doesn't seem to be at this point.
I wonder if what he's pretending to be ill of is that he got some bad food. Because he makes the point when he asks that she make him something in his sight.
I don't know. I haven't thought about that.
Some bad food or something.
I don't know.
Like, let her make it in front of me so I can see that there's nothing done to it.
I haven't considered that. So, David sends for Tamar, saying, go to your brother Ammon's house and prepare food for him. So Tamar went to her brother's house, and he was lying down. She took flour, and she kneaded it, and she made cakes in his sight, and baked the cakes. And she took the pan and placed them out of it before him, but he refused to eat. So how long does it take to knead bread, mix the dough, knead bread, bake it, all of that? She's there in his sight for a while. And I don't know what all's going on in his mind, but this is going on, and he won't eat. After all of this, he won't eat. And then he says, have everyone go out from me. Okay. Now, when I said that there were some safeguards in place, there were other people there. When David sent Tamar, he may have very well had, well, I know all the servants will be there. It's not like they're going to be alone or anything. And but now they are, because he tells all of the servants, everybody go out from me. And then Ammon said to Tamar, bring the food into the bedroom, that I may eat from your hand. And Tamar took the cakes which she had made and brought them to Ammon, her brother, in the bedroom. And now when she had brought them for him to eat, he took hold of her and said, come lie with me, my sister. And she answered, no, my brother, do not force me, for such a thing should not be done in Israel. Do not do this disgraceful thing. You know, her wisdom in what she says here is pretty profound in such a moment. First of all, no, this is disgraceful. This should not be done in Israel. And then she continues and she says, and where can I take my shame? And as for you, you would be like one of the fools in Israel. And then she makes this proposal, and this is what Karen was referring to. Now, therefore, please speak to the king, for he will not withhold me from you. What she seems to be saying is, look, this would be a terrible way. If this is what you think you want, this is a terrible way to try to get it. Go to the king and ask permission. And now, I don't know if she's speaking this, saying, I think this is a real possibility, or if she's just proposing something here to try to get out of this situation.
That's kind of what I thought. It was a desperate attempt to get out of this situation.
Yeah. I don't know. And I can't imagine David going along with this and say, okay, well, if that's but she's trying to avoid this from taking place. And for a number of reasons. She says, what can I do with my shame? This is terrible for you as well. You're going to be considered a fool by everyone. And first of all, it's just wrong. It's just wrong. Don't do this.
I like what the ESV says, outrageous fool.
Mm-hmm.
Describes that.
Oh,
that's
yeah.
how he would be perceived, as an outrageous fool
Yeah.
in Israel.
And remember, he's the firstborn. He's the one that the expectation would be upon. However, he would not heed her voice, and being stronger than she, he forced her and lay with her. All right, something that I want to point out here in verse 11, we were introduced to this, and I know we're looking at translated words, but verse 1 says that Ammon, the son of David, loved Tamar. Verse 11, come, lie with me, my sister. Is that love or is that lust? Yes, it is. It is lust. And yet, to Ammon, it felt like love. It felt like strong love. But it was not love. Love would not do that to another person. And love would not have the consequences that this is going to have. Notice verse 15. How did Ammon feel about her after this was done? That doesn't sound like love. Lust leaves you very empty. And it left him very empty. He may have satisfied whatever cravings he had, but it left him empty, and now this turns to despising her. And it says that he hated her exceedingly, so that the hatred which he hated her was greater than the love which he loved. In other words, his negative feelings towards her now are stronger than the great desires he had for her earlier. And he says, arise and be gone. And she looks at this and says, wow, this is even more cruel than what you've already done. Now, I think that we would have to understand something probably about ancient culture that maybe wouldn't naturally come to our thinking in the 21st century. And that is, what is, in ancient times, what would Tamar's position be now? Tell me the situation she's in now.
She's ruined because she's not virgin.
Yeah, she's ruined because she's not a virgin anymore. Now, we don't think that way as much today, and maybe they shouldn't even thought that way then, I don't know. But she realizes, my chances of a husband wanting me are next to nothing. So where does that leave her?
Has to go live with somebody she'll take care of.
Yeah. And typically, unmarried women, whether widows or otherwise, had a really tough time because the men were the financial stability in a home.
It was a man's world.
It was a man's world. And so she realizes, so not only have you raped me, but now you are leaving me completely destitute in this. This is worse than what you've already done.
It didn't matter that she was the king's daughter,
No, that's exactly right.
because the shame was going to follow her.
That's right. That's exactly right.
I mean, it sounds cruel, but she was damaged goods from
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
point forward.
Yes.
Wonder if this is also a part of David's public shame in addition to his wives that the other ones are going to take, because, he said, because of this thing that you've done, I'm going to make it open, and everybody in Israel is going to know of the shame of you.
Yeah. It would certainly be shameful to his family that this is taking place. That's right. So she said, no, indeed, this evil of sending me away is worse than the other you did to me. But he would not listen to her. And he called the servants. Now think about this treatment at this point. He calls the servants who attended him and said, here, put this woman out away from me and bolt the door behind her. Now she had on the robe of many colors, for the king's virgin daughters wore such apparel. And his servants put her out and bolted the door behind her. And Tamar put ashes on her head and tore her robe of many colors that was on her, laid her hand on her head, and went away crying bitterly. The consequences of sin. The sword will not depart from your house. Shame. Notice what's already taken place here. You've got Ammon hating her. You have her weeping bitterly, crying bitterly. You see the turmoil that's already taking place in this family, and that's just going to escalate as things go on. Any thoughts or comments through verse 19? Who's her full brother? Absalom. And he's concerned about his little sister. I say little sister. We don't know exactly where she falls in birth order, but he feels protective of her. Absalom, her brother, said to her, has Ammon, your brother, been with you? In other words, he had some suspicion, it seems, that clued him in that all of this weeping and crying may have something to do with Ammon. And he says, but now hold your peace, my sister. He is your brother. Do not take this thing to heart. I don't think that he's saying, I don't think the intention of this is, it's no big deal. It's no big deal what he did. I think what he's saying is, you don't worry about this. I'll take care of this. Mm-hmm. I'll take care of this. And
if they'd tried to invoke the Levitical law, it would have been her word against his word. So she really had no recourse in this.
Yes.
She was basically a woman saying this had happened.
Yes.
Inside of the room that no one was witness to.
That's right.
So Absalom, what he said to her was basically, yes, this is wrong, but we will take care of it.
That's right. That's an excellent point.
That's a good point.
It is. Let me piggyback off of what you're saying there. Levitical law. What was the punishment if a man raped a woman? Death. For who?
Not me.
The man. All right. Now, do you remember that the law said this? If it was in the countryside and there was no one to witness or hear the woman yelling out, and she resisted, and he forced her, that only the man was to die. If it was in the city, then both were to die. And the idea was not, well, it's within the city limits. The idea was there were people around that she could have cried out to.
They would have heard her cry.
They would have heard her cry out. Now, in this situation, this is taking place inside the city of Jerusalem in one of the king's son's quarters. Could have she cried out? Did she cry out? Well, we don't know. We know that she was not in favor of this. We know that she resisted this, at least verbally, in this. And it says that he was stronger than her and forced her. So it seems like she physically resisted as well. Now, did she cry out? Maybe. I'm going to say that, yes, she's going to be on the innocent side of
I
this.
think by her resisting, whether it was
Yes.
a verbal cry or what, I mean,
That's
it's the
right.
same thing.
So what would you do if you're one of Ammon's servants and you hear something going on in that other room and you feel like that probably someone is being abused by your master? What do you do?
Well, the thing about it is, was that when Allen told the servants to leave, they may not have been
They
nowhere
may-
near that.
that's right.
Left totally out of that part of the castle or.
That's right. So
He was able to call them back, though, when
Yeah.
he was finished, so it makes you wonder how far they truly were.
Well, they knew they couldn't do anything.
that's the point that I want to make here is that no one coming to the rescue and help may not be because nobody heard, although that's very possible as well. I'm not denying that that's a possibility. What I'm saying is this is a unique situation where not many people are going to intervene to help because of who's involved in this. And the point that you were making about Tamar, she's in a very vulnerable situation. So, all right, so the second thing that the law said is if a man takes a virgin, and this is where a lot of critics of the Bible want to say, so in the Old Testament law, if you raped a woman, then she had to marry you. I'm not convinced that that's what the law is saying. I think the law is talking about, because it deals with rape, and then it talks about if a man takes a virgin and sleeps with her, then the recourse from that is he should marry her. Why should he marry her? Because nobody else is going to. And so the idea, and the law says, and he can never divorce her. In other words, he's responsible for her for the rest of her life.
Taking responsibility.
He's taking
for that.
responsibility for it. All right, so whatever we're going to do with this situation needs to fall into one of these categories. Either he slept with a virgin and she consented to it, and now he needs to take responsibility for that and marry her and take care of her for the rest of her life, or he needs to be put to death. According to the law, those are the only two options that I can see. That would be there. Yes, sir.
One more thing, in that you're not to look at your sister's name.
That's right. Yes.
And that too is death.
That's exactly right. Yeah,
It says specifically your father's or your mother.
you're exactly right. Yes.
But you would think that David would have had kids.
You think?
But
And he's angry.
Yeah.
he's angry, but he just,
But-
that's right.
Yeah. So let's think about that as we go further in this. So Absalom said, I will take care of that. Verse 21, David heard these things. David knows about this. David is angry. What would you expect the next verse to be?
David killed.
David calls for Ammon. But the very next verse says, Absalom spoke to his brother, neither good nor bad. Absalom hated Ammon because he had forced his sister Tamar. And then the next verse says, and it came to pass after 2 full years. David does nothing. Have we seen David this indecisive before?
Usually a man of action.
Usually a man of action. What's happened? Why is he handling this differently than he would any other situation that we've seen from him? It's his son.
Because he felt guilty, that's what she said.
It's his son who saw a beautiful woman and desired her, but she was off limits, called for her, and lay with her.
Not called McKinley.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, we got a situation here. Now, David did exactly the same thing. David repented of it. What did God do?
For David.
God forgave him. Should that forevermore shaped David so that he can no longer condemn such action because he was once guilty of it.
What he was, he should have seek the countenance of God and asked him, what do I need to do?
I bet David knew what the law
I
said.
think you pretty much do too.
He never even in all the scriptures there ever seek God's.
Well, the law was pretty clear. I think he knew the law. I think the problem is this, and I think you all hit it exactly right on. David is looking at it and saying, well, how could I condemn this person to death when I did the same thing and I was not put to death? That's an understandable feeling.
He doesn't feel like he's fully forgiven.
I think that's...
Because as humans, that's what we do sometimes.
Here's the greatest lesson that I learned from this story. How many of us have sinned? How many of us have begged for forgiveness? When we are forgiven, then we have to live as forgiven. We cannot let that constantly be a ball and chain on the way that we live our lives. What David is doing right here, and I heard a man say one time, he was talking about that his son was involved in some things and doing some things, and he said, but I don't know what I could say to him because I did the same things when I was his age. Well, what do you say? You say, you know what? I did the same thing, and those things were wrong, and I regret that. And I don't want you to make that mistake, and I can't let you make that mistake. I can't support you in this. You cannot let your past sins continue to shape your perception or your stand for righteousness going forward. You have to accept forgiveness and continue to move forward. So I think I believe it was Mike I was having a discussion with, and we were talking about David's turmoil in his house. Now, God pronounced that there would be turmoil in David's house from this point on. But what I want you to see is that turmoil was a consequence of David not really dealing with this sin the way that it should have been dealt with. He now exacerbates the problem. He causes this turmoil in his family because he doesn't deal with this, and I think he doesn't deal with it because of his guilt and his shame on that. And that's understandable, but it's not acceptable. And I'll say this, if we do the same thing, it'll have the same consequences today. If a father says, well, I can't tell my son not to do this because I did this when I was his age, that's bad logic. It's bad logic. And it'll lead to bad consequences. And that's true all the way down the line. If you sin, repent of that sin and then stand for what's right. I'm not saying you deny that you ever sinned, but you stand for what's right. And David doesn't do that here, and that's going to cost him greatly. Thoughts, comments?
I forgot about it being 2 years past, and you'd think Ammon would be scared, thinking that knowing that Absalom's mad. But if you think about 2 years, he thinks, oh, he's forgotten.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you keep in mind that, it was different. They were living in different quarters and stuff. They wouldn't be living, all together. So there would be distance between them.
But 2 years is a long time to plan a revenge.
Now, Absalom, I'm impressed with Absalom here that he spoke neither good nor bad this whole time. In other words, he just kept it to himself. I'll take care of this, he told her. We know that he's looking for an opportunity to take care of this, but for 2 years, he doesn't lash out. He doesn't let anything be known. He just continues to go on. That's impressive restraint. Whatever you want to say about it, it's impressive restraint.
That's usually what happens when the ones that you have to worry about, even in today's time, the one that something others happen to and he stays real quiet and don't do nothing, he's more apt to kill you than he goes around and brags about what he's going to do.
You may be right.
The one that's usually quiet.
That's the one you got to watch, huh?
One quiet ones.
They'll go, I wonder who done that. There's no track.
Yeah. All right, let's pick up. Joe, do you want to pick up at verse 23?
All right, I'm going to do just a little bit of paraphrasing just for sake of time. But after 2 full years, there's sheep shearing that takes place at Baal Hazor. And I don't know if you have that labeled on the map, but looking at it, it's north of Jerusalem, kind of halfway between Jerusalem and Shechem. But you said that this was like a celebratory time because this was the hardest time of the year as far as the work that took place during sheep shearing. So it was tradition to have a feast for all your servants and whatnot.
Gerald just finished getting his new chickens, which is the busiest time for a poultry farmer, is between the time the birds go out and the time the next batch comes in. So he's probably feeling that type of feeling right now. Okay, let's go out to eat. Let's go out to eat and celebrate. Yeah, that's the idea of a sheep shearing feast.
So anyway, Absalom coordinates this effort, and he, in fact, is going to invite his father, the king, to this event. The king does decline, but he does send his blessing with him. But he asked his father one thing. What does he ask him? Yeah, that Ammon go. And that kind of seems like that throws a red flag to David, but he allows him regardless. And so now the stage is set. And so Absalom goes to his servants and he tells them, I want you to keep your eyes on Ammon. And then when his heart is married with wine, I want you to strike him down. And these are my orders. So you let me bear the consequence of whatever happens. But you follow my orders and do this thing. And so what does his servants do?
They wait for his command.
Yes.
When it's given, they carry it out.
They carry it out. They follow it to the letter. And they strike them down. And keep in mind now, David has other brothers there on this occasion. And they see the oldest being taken out. What do you think's running through their mind?
Oh, my names.
Exactly. Because that's what this looks like. This looks like a power thing that Absalom is trying to annihilate anyone that could be a threat to him taking the throne. So this seems like a coup, in other words. And so they all flee. They all jump on their mules and flee. And word comes back to David. And what's the word that comes back to David? Yeah, it's not just Ammon, it's all his sons have been killed. Absalom has slain them all. And David just, falls to pieces over this. I think he puts, what does it say? He puts ashes on his head. Does he?
Tore his garments.
Yeah, tore their clothes. I mean, it's a obvious sign of mourning, and you can only imagine what David is feeling at this time. But then again, that friend of Ammon shows up, and he says, no, all the sons are not dead, just Ammon. And it almost paints a picture here of relief. But maybe that's exactly what has taken place within David's heart. Because David knows that he should have done this a long time ago. And because he did not have the gumption and the courage to carry it out, because of his past actions, his son has to carry it out for him.
Yes.
Another man that died during the sheep shearing, and he was a worthless fool as well.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Nabal. Yeah.
Yep.
That is right. That's exactly right. So let's finish the text here, and then we'll maybe go back and make a few points in our last few minutes. So Absalom flees at this point, and the young man who was keeping watch lifted his eyes, and sure enough, here comes the king's sons coming in. And Jonadab says to the king, look, the king's sons are coming. It's just as I said it was. Not everybody's dead, just Ammon's dead. So he was crafty. He figured out real quick what was going on and how all of this went down. He was a sharp guy, just not a very good friend. And as soon as they finished speaking, the king's sons came in, and what was the response? Everybody lifts up their voices and weeps. All right, so we're looking at how is this affecting the family. Man, we just look back. Ammon hated Tamar. Tamar's crying bitterly. Tamar remains desolate in her brother's house. David's very angry about this. Absalom hates Ammon. Absalom kills Ammon. And then everybody's weeping and crying. And then Absalom flees. He has to flee. And where does he go? Goes to Geshur. Up here, if you got the Sea of Galilee, Geshur is going to be right here, and the capital city of Geshur is going to be right up where, Bethsaida is in the New Testament time. So the fishing village that several of the apostles came from, Bethsaida, was the ancient city of Geshur. And I showed this picture here because in Bethsaida this is the gate that dates back to the time of this. Why did he go to Geshur? That's right. His mother was from there. His grandfather was the king of Geshur. So this would have been a place where he could go that was outside of David's jurisdiction, where he could find some solace there.
Some refuge.
Yes, some refuge. That's exactly right.
And also, he could probably tell his grandfather what had transpired against his sister to actually get in good with him if David was to come. I'm just revenging what happened to my sister.
Right. Now, I want you to notice something here that it says about David in verse 37. David mourned every day for his son. What son? I think that's right. Not Ammon. Because if you continue down, Absalom fled and was at Geshur. How long was he there at Geshur? 3 years. All right, we'll come back to that. David longed to go to Absalom. Okay, that seems to be the son that he's mourning for he had been comforted concerning Ammon because he was dead. In other words, the turmoil that he had over Ammon is, Ammon should be punished, and I haven't punished him. Now he's been punished, he's comforted concerning Ammon because, well, that was what he deserved. That's what should have taken place. Well, who should have done that? David should have done that. But Absalom did that. Now Absalom feels like he has to run away. And what does David do? If that's the right thing, if that's what should have been done, David didn't do it, Absalom stepped up and did it, what should David do at this point?
Go get them.
Absalom, you're right. I was wrong. Yeah. And again, indecisiveness taking place here. And so whichever way this should have been handled, David does nothing. He does nothing. And for 3 years, that's going to continue on. This indecisiveness just festers and boils till it creates more and more family turmoil. And so, yes, God's statement that the sword will never depart from your house is definitely taking place. David is the one that's creating this environment by his not being decisive because he's not secure in himself spiritually. He's not secure in his position anymore.
It's going to build resentment in Absalom's heart, but also, what kind of message does it send to Absalom? It sends a message of David's weak.
Yeah.
And so he's got 3 years to, build on this and develop this.
Yeah.
Even more so than that, the whole kingdom of Israel, David's kingdom. After all these years, all this has went around. Everybody in the whole nation knows about what's all transpired, all the stuff on Sheba, the dead, the sister, all of it.
That's right. And so 2 things are happening. You mentioned that it's building resentment because Absalom's realizing David is weak. Guess what? The rest of the nation is seeing some chinks in David's armor too. That's going to make them more willing to maybe support another king later. Yes?
When Joab says, David, we're in this battle, he's going to come.
Yeah.
They're going to call the city after me. He was even not showing leadership.
Yeah.
That's right. That's a good point. Good point. All right, go ahead.
Do we know how old David is during this time?
I bet somebody has an idea, but that somebody's not me right now. Anybody have any thoughts on that? You got any idea of David's age at this point?
It's going to be probably 42. He started reigning at 30, so 7.5 years in Jerusalem and Hebrew. So he'd be 37 and a half, and then he obviously probably has some more children.
Yeah. I was thinking closer to 50, but I don't know where I got that from, so I can't.
Well, you've got the
You
two,
got the siege that happened a few years.
Right.
but you've got 2 years after that nothing happened, and then he's over there at Gesher for 3 years. That's 5 year span right there in this one story.
Yeah. Plus the earlier wars and everything that took
Right.
place. So, yeah, I don't know. We'll see if we can't come up with something for that. Thank you for your good attention. Appreciate it. Thanks for watching. If you found this video to be beneficial, please follow us on Facebook or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Feel free to share it with others that you feel like may benefit from it. If you need to contact us, please contact us via email at quinn.church@yahoo.com. Also, if you're in the area, we would love for you to come visit with us at one of our assemblies. Have a good day.